Hello and welcome to my video on rational functions, curve sketching. In today's video, I'll be using the example 3x squared plus 4x minus 4 all over x squared minus 1 as my example. So to start off, I always want to factor my function first. And my second step is always to state any restrictions, in which is x cannot equal 1 and x cannot equal negative 1, as it will create a denominator of 0, and which will give me an undefined function. My third step is to simplify, however this is already in its simplest form. My fourth step, is to figure out my vertical asymptotes, in which they are the exact same as my restrictions because they occur when my graph is undefined. My fifth step is to figure out any horizontal asymptotes, in which I notice that my degrees in the numerator and the denominator are the same. Therefore, I can simply divide the leading coefficients to get my horizontal asymptote value, in which will be y is equal to 3. And lastly, I know that I do not have a linear oblique asymptote, as I already have a horizontal asymptote present. So here, I will simply just graph out my vertical asymptotes as well as my horizontal asymptote on this graph. Moving on, I want to figure out what my graph is doing at both my vertical asymptotes, in which I want to answer these two questions. As x is approaching positive 1 from the right, what is y doing? And as x is approaching 1 from the left, what is y doing? So here I want to pick values really close to 1, but to the right and to the left of 1. So for my first question, I pick this value, which will give me a really large positive value, which will tell me that y is approaching positive infinity during this circumstance. And for this question, I want to pick a value to the left of 1, in which I pick this value, which gave me a really large negative value, which will tell me y is approaching negative infinity during this circumstance. And here, I'll just simply plot these end behaviors down and move on. So here, I want to simply do the same thing I did to the first vertical asymptote to the second asymptote. So here I want to answer these two questions. As x is approaching negative 1 from the right, what is y doing? And as x is approaching negative 1 from the left, what is y doing? And again, here I want to pick values really close to negative 1, but to the right and to the left of negative 1. So for my first question, I picked this value, and which will give me a really large positive value, which will tell me that y is approaching positive infinity during this circumstance. And for my second question, I want to pick a value to the left of negative 1, which I picked this value, and which will give me a really large negative value, which will tell me y is approaching negative infinity during this circumstance. So here, I'm just simply going to plot these down again and move on. Here, I want to figure out what my graph is doing at positive and negative infinity at my horizontal asymptote. In order to do that, I'm going to answer these two questions. At 1,000, x is approaching positive infinity and y is approaching 3 from either above or below the horizontal asymptote. And similarly, at negative 1,000, x is approaching negative infinity and y is approaching 3, which is our horizontal asymptote, from either above or below it. So here I can just simply plug in positive 1,000 to give me this value, which is above 3, which is above our horizontal asymptote, which will tell me that y is approaching 3 from above. And similarly, I can plug in negative 1,000, which will give me a value below 3, which will tell me that y is approaching 3 from below. Here, I can simply graph these down or plot these down, and let's move on. And here, we can finally connect our end behaviors using our x-intercept, our y-intercept, and our POI, our point of intersection. In order to do this, we need to plug in y as 0 to figure out our x-intercept, in which will give us an x-intercept of x is equal to 2 over 3 and negative 2, in which I put them in very nice coordinate points. And for my y-intercept, I'm going to plug in x as 0. So if I plug in this, it will give me f of 0 is equal to 4, and I put this in really nice coordinate values. Next, I want to figure out my point of intersection at my horizontal asymptote. So I'm going to make my horizontal asymptote equal to my function and solve for x. And when I do solve for x, it will give me a value of 1 over 4. Therefore, I have a point of intersection at 1 over 4, 3. So if I plot all these down and connect my dots, it will give me a really nice function that clearly represents my rational function here. And yeah, that's all.